the intention was to find somebody who would be able to just exist with us for 2 months and have the real feelings that Owen, the character, would really have. Like, why are we doing this? This is a waste of my time. Like, this is stupid. Because eventually, as the movie goes on, that's all that his character is expressing, which is very much in line with how the real Owen really felt. Because, I mean, a lot of those two big blow-ups that he has, like, none of them are scripted. He's just, I mean, obviously he knows that he's performing, but they're coming from a very real place. Yeah. Like, that's exactly how he feels. So,
was that a dynamic you used in Nirvana as well?
It's the exact same.
So you just
even with people who don't know they're on camera with us, we do that same trick. You approach people on their level, like where because you know what somebody's going to say before you talk to them normally. Like, so say those kids at the very beginning of the film, when we went up to them, we knew they were excited about making a movie, and we knew that they were enamored because they saw that we had cameras too, and they thought, oh wow. So you knew that they were going to want to talk to us about it. So long as you don't bring your agenda to them, people will normally say whatever it is that they're going to say, and they'll normally say it perfectly. Like, they'll act better than you could ever tell somebody to act, because that's just how they are. So long as you give them that space to do that, and then you try to twist it with whatever plot it is that you're trying to put into it, you can get away with murder.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. That's exactly what we did with Owen. Like, we would get to these points, and whenever he would do something real or bring something that seemed very genuine, we would just roll on that, and the scene would change to whatever he was reacting to.
And Owen was a godsend, because we couldn't find, like, this movie literally was on the shelf for a year because we had auditioned like 100 guys, and we couldn't find the right guy to sort of bounce off of Matt. Jay, who had done it in Nirvana the band, he looked too old.
Yeah.
And we could pass Matt off as a high school student, but we couldn't pass off Matt and Jay. And so by finding Owen, who actually looks even younger, it makes Matt look younger.
Yep.
Which really helped us. And it was a gift that Matt called me one day. He's like, I found him. I found the guy. There's this guy, Owen.
And he sounds like me. That was the pitch. The other producer, Evan Morgan, is his best friend. And he said, there's this guy I know, he's a teacher, but he sounds so much like you. I've always thought that. And then I met him, and I was like, oh, he's perfect. And we just cast him with no audition, nothing. And we started shooting the movie.
But we had you guys hang out for
6 months.
Lot of time.
I got him a job teaching where I was teaching at the Ontario Science Centre. And so he and I would hang out at work for, 8 hours a day for 4 or 5 months, just to try to learn the same inside jokes. Same inside jokes is very important to us because it's good shorthand.
I'm still trying to figure them out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So is this like an approach that you would use moving forward, like non-actors, 6-month immersion therapy?
I don't know. This next film we want to make with Owen again, but it takes place in the 1960s. So we're doing all the same tricks, but the approach is very different because, like, we can't just walk down the street and find random people and put them in the movie without them knowing. Like, it needs to be very specific. It all takes place between like the CIA and NASA bases in Cape Canaveral and Houston. So we're doing all the same things with real people, with real scientists, with like adults at their job, and us approaching them as though we're approaching them in the world of a documentary. But we just need to be a bit more careful about it. But we're excited about it. We think that's a very interesting challenge, to try to make a found footage film all in the 1960s, but in the modern day. Like, because if we can pull it off, it'll, I think, be very compelling to watch.
Yeah.
Because you won't know, because in as much as in the Dirties, you don't know what's real and what's not real, that layer is going to be even thicker and more robust if the entire world is 1968.
And I always rather work with non-actors than real, like, unless you have, like Clooney and Streep, like, I think that in-between world of low-budget filmmaking and acting, it's, I rather work with real people who just are very natural.
And patient. People who are patient, who are willing to do,
and who don't have takes. Like tricks and tools and methods, because unless those are like really honed, if you've really honed in on them and you're amazing, which there are a lot of amazing actors, but they're few and far between. And so I think, just real people who have that ability to be themselves on camera are far more interesting.
Because the worst thing you can get, we find, is the actor who is still trying to prove themselves as an actor, and that is very much in their head whenever they're in a scene or in a moment. they're very much trying to, you know, get at the emotion of the scene, or get at the beats of the scene, or explicate, not in an overt way like you would in the theater, but explicate in some way to camera that they think is going to be helping the filmmaking process, when that's the exact opposite of the kinds of films that we want to make. The exact opposite. We want to do films where the explication is completely invisible.
Which is really tricky in this method because there's no script. So so there's the structure and the skeleton and the bones, but if you get somebody in there who just wants to hear themselves talk and has a lot to say, that's like...
Or has ideas for the scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're looking for empty vessels.
Yeah, we're looking for people who are just going to be there reacting to whatever is happening, and when we don't even know what's going to happen. Like, I don't know what I'm going to say before I say it. I have no idea. And maybe I say something that is catchy or makes the crew react in a certain way, and we need other people on camera who aren't going to either laugh at that or try to turn that into something, but just be in that moment. Or if an old man walks up to us and asks us what happened, like, they're not going to freak out and say, "Oh, I just got hit by a rock." That's what you like. It's not. It happens in a totally organic way, where they're just there, which is in one sense very, very easy to do, because you get people who don't care on camera. You don't need to give any directions. Everybody just sort of does their thing. But it's also very hard, because peeling down the ego of most people on camera is next to impossible. For me too, it's really hard.
But the coolest thing to watch on set, like when we're working, is because Matt's almost always on camera in the scene, and to watch him direct from within the scene just by saying shit that he knows how people will react, or he hopes and thinks that they're going to react in a certain way. So he'll have an idea and he'll just run with it simply by, in character, saying something that would get Owen or whoever, or usually like the people who didn't know that they were on camera when we shot. Like, if you watch that first scene of the movie with those two kids, you know, they just happened to be in the park. It was like this incredible serendipitous moment, and he went up to them, and the way he engages them and invites them into the scene is amazing, and you know, like it's a gift and a talent that not everybody, I think, could do. And you know, like the movie wasn't directed in a traditional sense, but it was directed from inside the scene a lot of the times, in the moment, just like taking the situation, staying in character, and running with it. And I think that's quite a talent, man.
Oh, thank you. Well, most people didn't even know I was
exactly
in charge of making the movie at all.
Exactly.
Especially when we were in schools. I was just, because the goal was to make everybody think we were just high school students. Yeah. So we would be shooting with this huge cafeteria, all of extras, so to speak, from that school, who were like, okay, we're going to be in a movie. But nobody knew that I was, you know, going to be deciding what was going to happen. And nobody knew that Owen was like a major part of it. So we would just be in these rooms with everybody kind of waiting for something to happen. And in that waiting, we would shoot the scenes. So in the classrooms, when everybody was waiting, we would shoot the scenes. When everybody was kind of waiting for the real movie to start, is when we would shoot our movie, which is very small and takes place between two characters, whispering mostly. And that's sort of, that was our approach on this, and it's definitely going to be our approach with this next film, just because it's so cool. So cool.
And part of the trick also is using like no crew, tiny cameras.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were like 3 people there.
And wireless microphones.
Yeah.
So nobody knows it's a movie. Yeah.
So with that being said, like the Dirties, the title, that group of people, are they just aggro assholes, or did you have to kind of direct them?
It's a mix.
Bit? Yeah.
It's a mix. So sometimes, like when we're in school, and we're getting bullied, like that's just happening in the environment because we would you know, aggravate people, or sometimes the producers would say, like, you know, go do this to a random student in the school. But then the bigger scenes, like those are staged. Like obviously the ending is very much set up, and the scenes of bullying right at the head are set up, but they're set up in a certain way. Like the Dirties know what's going on. In fact, that main guy who bullies me at the beginning of the film is the guy who came up with the whole idea for the movie.
Oh, okay.
But the people around us, like all the students around us, they have no idea what's about to happen. Like they have no clue, and so they're reacting, and the way what they see, they're seeing it for the first time, and they have no idea where it's going to go. So while I know, and Owen knows, and the bullies know what's about to happen, nobody else knows. And because it's just sort of happening randomly, and who knows, maybe I get punched in the face, or, you know, like who knows what's going to happen. Everybody's kind of on their feet, like what's going to happen this take, like what's going to happen this time. So.
But they know not to intervene, right? Like they're not like. Because you
No,
could say
no,
that
they
that's
do
like
anything.
a sociological thing. Like no one's bothering to step in and help out.
Well, like we didn't instruct people not to do
Yeah.
that.
Everybody was just like, okay, you're in school. You're in
The
school.
idea
I
was
mean,
just
and
like no matter
sometimes-
what happens, roll with it, react naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that nobody goes in and helps these kids, I mean, I think that's how it works.
Yeah.
I think if you go into a high school,
Yeah, no one wants to.
you just keep your head down.
But sometimes it would happen with people who had no idea it was even in a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that old guy.
Yeah,
So
like-
we had extras background guys, our friends, like throwing rocks at these guys. And then
He didn't do much. He just kind of sat back and was kind of like.
He did ask if you needed help.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was just confused. He's just confused the way most of the people were.
And he was even more confused when you go up to him afterwards and you're like, will you sign this?
So it's a found footage film, and there's kind of like a documentary quality, but it sounds like you're shooting it like a documentary, like you're shooting a lot of footage and.
100%.
Yeah.
It's not a found footage film in our opinion. Like it is this sort of this area that we call just like the show we made, Nirvana the
Yeah.
band. It's just a fake documentary. Like it's as though like the War Room was faked. Like that's our approach all the time. We very much take the mindset of the documentary filmmakers making this film, and every decision that we make in terms of coverage is all from that mindset. So we would never do something like where we would get the footage from a security camera or we would get the footage from somebody's cell phone. Like it never, the filmmaker's always in control of the A camera, the B camera, and we only use that. In this film, we use some of Matt's cameras as well, but Matt is the filmmaker, so that counts. So,
And I think because in the movie we see Matt editing the material, I think it sort of calls attention to the fact that it's not really a found footage movie because the movie is so manicured and so
constructed.
Yeah.
And constructed with a point of view, which is something that we think, which we really like, which you don't see in many films. Like very rarely, I mean, it's almost seen as a failing in a film when you can see the director's voice.
Yeah.
But our approach, at least with this film and with this next film that we're making, is if the director is a character in the film,
main character.
Then every editing decision becomes quite rich because his decisions are thematic decisions, not just technical decisions. So the Dirties, we definitely wanted to explore that, and this next film is the same way.
It seems like there's another good comparison, which would be Man Bites Dog, because
Huge.
the cameramen are kind of complicit at a certain point, and they're also, you say the decision of the director is obvious, but there's also like those shots where it seems like maybe the camera person is picking something up that they weren't instructed to film necessarily. So you kind of become aware as an audience member that there are decisions being made by the camera operators, and especially by the end of the film, like
It gets blurry.
Yeah.
Well, Man Bites Dog was the
References
first
to the
stone.
Bible,
The
yeah.
first stone in this building was Josh Bowles was really interested in that film and thought it would be a good idea based on the web show that we made to try to do something about a psychopathic guy, and that's all we had. And we wanted to follow that line all the way through. The difference that we had was we didn't want to show the camera people, and we didn't want to have them as like actors, literally as actors in the film, because we wanted to keep the audience very much in that perspective, like the audience as the perspective of the cameras. But you're 100% right in saying that that there is a blurring between who's making these decisions. Like the cameraman getting a shot through a window that clearly is something that Matt maybe doesn't want the audience to see, but our reaction afterwards was that Matt is such a egomaniacal filmmaker that he's like, oh, thank God you got that. You got that scene of me crying in the corner. We got to use it. Like he's proud of everything because he's such a egomaniac.
Well, there's a scene where he's looking at himself getting beaten up, and that kind of builds in that reading, like that it's like a different person when you're watching it.
Yeah, he literally says that.
Yeah, which comes from an honest place, which is odd, in a lot of ways, because for me, making a film like this and watching these fake moments of myself, like there's so many levels of fakeness to it that I think what Matt says in the film is very real. Like when you watch footage of yourself doing anything, it seems like it's a different person. In that context, it's real for him because he's really watching himself get beat up. But for me, watching that, it's the same thing. It's like a completely alien thing where I have no emotional connection to it whatsoever, which I think is kind of interesting because with that film, we were sort of trying to chart somebody's slow alienation from their own reality, and that really does, in a lot of ways, happen with a film like this, and it's something that we've done for 3 years before this, so it really was coming from an honest place, feeling alienated by your own image.
There's
Well, I think like to go back to it's very interesting because we've been doing these Q&As at these screenings, and everybody wants to talk about kind of the camera person and are they complicit and why don't we see them and who is it and it's very interesting because to me it's very uninteresting like in 2013 to be kind of thinking about these things because I feel like we're so used to that form, like we're so familiar with reality television and stuff like The Office and the mock doc and all these kinds of things that came before us that like I feel like it doesn't matter anymore, and yet people still are really interested in it and want to talk about it. And we had like the first 20 minutes of the movie used to be basically explaining, setting this up, and these are the mechanics, and this is who's shooting the camera,
And why?
And now I think there's three. I think there's 2 or 3 times where you address the camera person,
the popcorn.
You ask Jared something once, and then at the end you're like, you're gonna have to put these credits in, and I think that's it. And to me, like the less attention you call to it, kind of the more interesting it becomes, and it really makes the viewer the camera person. It makes the viewer complicit in what's happening.
Plus, it's a construction. I mean, Matt is choosing what to show and what not to show. Like, he just decided at a certain point, like, no, we don't want to show these kids. We don't want to show the camera people or whatever. But
I like that idea of the viewer and the cameraman being similar because you're talking about the kind of detachment that goes on for the character as the film progresses, but kind of the viewer is walking a fine line between this sympathy or empathy with the characters and that emotional connection, but also there's like detachment that's happening with the form, like it's postmodern, like you're getting like, he's referencing filmmakers, things like that, but then you're also hearing like Carter Burwell's Being John Malkovich score, like as a viewer that you're emotionally connected to something that is also kind of postmodern and detached. And I'm wondering what made you choose that form, I guess.
I mean, that very much comes out of what we were doing with that web show. I mean, formally, I don't think we even experimented. I don't think there's any formal decisions we made in the Dirties that we didn't already do to death in Nirvana the Band.
Nirvana the Band was like practicing, without knowing it, it was practicing to make this movie.
So those formal tricks we started doing because we thought they were so funny. Like we thought it was so funny for a show to not care about things like copyright or artistic intention, like taking music or taking images that were meant for something very important or emotional and using them for just the stupidest comedy, intentionally. Like we don't care. Like just showing a kind of cultural nihilism that we think is very much in the air right now with everybody remixing everything. But then the decision to start using those same tricks for drama, we thought was just a whole other layer to this big joke that we started with Nirvana the Band. So definitely like that. I would say those decisions that what you referenced exactly, like when I'm in drag singing Malkovich, because this guy, that's the only time he's ever seen a man wearing a dress is in Being John Malkovich, when John Malkovich is just saying Malkovich, and then later putting in the theme of that song. Like those are the things that are more exciting to me as a filmmaker than any other decision we made in the film. Like those are the things that I loved about this, that I love about this medium, and that I want to keep doing more than anything. Because it's crazy, nobody does that stuff. Like nobody will just steal a soundtrack from another film and use it like sort of against the grain in their other.
But it's pretty deep. I mean, that said, like
not many people realize that we took the track from Being John Malkovich.
You're like the third person
okay.
who at least has said it to us.
But that doesn't matter, because for the 5 or 6 people who get it,
of course. We had that debate a lot with like very specific drops in the movie, like references, and like, will this resonate? Like, does this mean anything? I had a battle with the other producer like over that LeBron James bit, which for me was like, I'm like, that's gonna be my dad's favorite bit, because me and my dad are big basketball fans. But like, this guy's like, I don't even know what that is, and I didn't know like the Boy Meets World bit, and I'm like, we gotta lose that. That's idiotic. But you put them in, and every screening you hear like the 3 people laughing, and that makes
or
it
not, even if 0 people got it. What's crazy about, I mean, it's weird to talk about inside jokes like this, but what's weird about inside jokes is that the conviction with which people talk about them with one another. So Matt and Owen have 7 or 8 references that I'm sure nobody will ever understand. But the fact that they have that kind of cant, this weird thieves language,
Yeah.
gives them a kind of humanity that you do not see in most filmmaking or in most narrative storytelling, because people are always speaking in a way that all audiences can understand. And as soon as people are talking in a way that nobody can understand, that's seen as inaccessible storytelling in some way. And I think that actually gets away from, in reality, the way people actually are. Because if you just overhear 2 best friends talking, you will probably understand nothing. Because even though they seem like they're talking like at one level and they're very serious, I'm sure that it's all, I mean, in certain situations, half the things you're hearing, they don't even mean to say seriously, right? I mean, when you guys talk to one another, I'm sure it's not, half the stuff you're saying is a joke when nobody's laughing, right? So how impossible to decode is that, right?
They're
And so to
actual codes, by the
Yeah,
way.
really.
But the only thing that mattered in this movie was that the audience understood that they understood.
Exactly.
You don't need to understand the reference. You understand, oh, these are 2 people talking about something. I don't understand what it is, and that's okay.
But it's
because
clear that they
understood.
do. Yeah,
that's
which is a risk, but we don't care. I mean, it's a small movie. It's not like we need to make this movie for 10 million people.
Actually,
to
we
all
tried to
understand.
make the movie for 10 million people because we
I think
test
we kept whittling it down.
screened, we test screened the shit out of it, and we just kept showing it to friends, and then we ran out of friends and family, and it was just like pulling people off the street to come. And we probably screened it like 7 or 8 times, and we'd make changes, and we realized the movie was getting worse. That the movie was just getting kind of like watered down, and it was like the lowest common denominator movie. And then we're just like, well, fuck that, and just.
We have to go
We went
back.
back.
We have to go back to all these inside jokes that make no sense.
And that's where a lot of that stuff, everybody would test screen the movie and they're like, the camera people, who are they? And so that's where this idea is like, oh, we got to put this in and we're really going to explain it. And it's, I do think test screenings are important, and it's important to sort of see how the movie's working. But I also think it's like really important to be sure of your voice and be sure of what you're trying to do and not let, those outside forces influence you too much.
And I think there's like a moment where the audience becomes aware that there's multiple readings, I guess, which is like the slow motion stuff, because it's like it can resonate because it's something that's so popular with current filmmaking and TV, but it's also, there's an ironic level when you're talking about like, oh, that doesn't seem genuine, like this isn't something I would typically do, have this montage over like a popular track that everything's happening in slow motion. So the audience is aware that even if you enjoy it or don't enjoy it, both can happen at the same time.
And all readings are true.
Yeah.
And you can see that the person making the movie has no idea what he's doing. Like, Matt is losing his mind, and you're trusting him to tell you this story about himself. Like, it's such a crazy space to be in as an audience member. And it's not like we really put you there. It's not like that Soderbergh movie or whatever, the one about the crazy guy was.
Schizopolis?
Yeah, it's not like Schizopolis. Like, I mean, like formally nothing crazy is happening. Like, it's all very much in the real world, but because the construction is being done by essentially a madman, especially as the film goes on, like how can you trust anything? So,
but those sequences, like as a producer, those sequences were very important because just like as a movie, it's a challenging movie to watch. It's kind of ugly, because it's supposed to be. It's essentially made by high school kids, and it's all handheld and shaky cam. So it was an excuse to kind of get to beautify the movie a little bit.
And put in those archetypal Hollywood moments.
Yeah, that make the movie, I think, more accessible, because by like 20 minutes in, and we waited we're like, how long can we get before we throw one of these in? And by the time it comes up, you're ready for it, and then they come up a little bit more frequently. And then it becomes a device that, as the audience, I think you recognize. And they certainly help to make the film, more marketable.
Were you looking for this to be like a story that could exist in any time? Because like when I started watching it, I kind of was like, is this like a period piece? It almost seems like a mid-90s, because there's like the ripped jeans, and then it's like, well, no, like there's technology that's current, but then it's like Limb Lifters on the soundtrack, and it's like,
Limb Lifter
what
was
period?
a late choice. A late choice. I'd always wanted to put that song in a movie, and we had a Beck song in there originally that we couldn't clear.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh God, well maybe this is a good excuse for me to try to use tinfoil finally. And then I did. I was so afraid of playing it for everybody, and they were all like, yeah, I remember that night I played it for everybody. And they were like, this is wicked. I was like, oh my God, oh yes, I get to put tinfoil in a movie. I wanted to put that song in a movie for like, I guess 8 years. And I thought nobody would ever get it. But your question is very good, and that's that, like, temporally, we were trying to place this in like modern day, but obviously our reference points were 90s reference points. And,
because we're not 17 and 18.
Yeah, because we're not actually that young. So we were not at all attempting to try to do this in a timeless way.
Yeah.
I mean, you also notice the characters don't use Facebook or the computer to communicate with people. There's no internet bullying, like
Yeah.
which is a huge thing right now that we don't even address. But we did that because we were trying to keep it all in very much like personal forums, like the way bullying happens between two people. We were trying to keep it out of the technological tropes that people are getting more and more into now. But that was less. We did not sit down and say it's 1996.
Yeah.
Big Shiny Tunes just came out, and this is all they listen to. Like that, we did not think that. It was kind of just a happy accident,
Well, it's an
or maybe an unhappy mistake, because we did not. We definitely didn't want to show a calendar with a date in it. But I think the form of the film, apart from, I mean, they use iPhones,
Yeah.
but apart
These iPhones, they watch
GoPros,
porn, they have
yeah.
GoPros.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're reading Columbine books. So, if anything, like it's certainly in a post-Columbine
Yeah,
universe.
But it's also like that's a Canadian moment, and I wanted to talk about kind of like hiding or showing the Canadian source, because you got Limited. It sounded like Owen was playing a Hayden track on the acoustic
That's
guitar.
very good. So you know that
But we
song,
didn't clear that, so that's
No,
not
it doesn't
true.
matter though, because Hayden is actually a good friend of Jay McCarroll's. They're on tour together right now. So that's crazy that you would notice that.
Well,
The
it's because
orig-
we're like generally the same age and just generally in the same.
The Hazards of
part,
Sitting
yeah.
Beneath Palm Trees.
Yeah.
That was originally the first draft of the script was all about that song. Not a joke. The entire
was Owen trying to master
third
it.
act of the film is literally about the hazards of sitting beneath palm trees, and that was going to be the closing song of the film. And Owen's trying to learn this song, and his plan is to play it for this girl, and then eventually he does master it, and he plays it for this girl, and then he gets beat up, and his guitar gets smashed, and he goes and does the school shooting, and that was all on paper, like when we just had like a treatment, which we never went beyond. We never wrote anything past 40 or 50 cue cards, like that's what we went to camera with. But as we started shooting, we realized that the story between Matt and Owen could not go to that place, and that Hayden song just kept getting smaller and smaller. And the one
still got it in
remaining
there.
vestige of it is that scene where Jay is teaching it to Owen, which is ironic because now Jay plays that song like every other night with Hayden.
But to your point,
that gets brought up a lot. The Canadianness of the film.
It's
We
funny.
did not try to hide it at all.
Slamdance, when they programmed our movie and they published their book, it said USA. It said
They published
country
us
of
as
origin.
Americans.
Which pissed me off, and I let them have it. But because I like being Canadian, I'm proud to be Canadian. I think it's a kind of film we don't see out of Canada all that often. But we didn't try to hide it. But at the same time, like this is. This problem obviously exists in Canada. We have our own history of school shootings, but it's an American issue.
And it's
above
seen
all.
as a huge American problem. And every single time we screen the film, like, people just expect us to be Americans. And then as soon as we start talking about Canada and how we shot the film, everybody's like, oh wow, Canadians, wow. It's like a big shock to everybody.
This one guy's like, I thought it was American, and then I kept hearing you say a boot.
Yeah, which is funny. We don't see ourselves having Canadian accents, but I guess like American viewers, at least the people who reviewed it online, like there's a radio show where they talked quite a bit about us having Canadian accents, which is funny because we know.
Well, we obviously don't.
Yeah,
hear
we
it.
don't we don't hear it, but I guess we do. But I mean, that was not something that we ever thought of once. Like we go to Thunder Bay, like by name, in the film. So I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure Americans have no idea what Thunder Bay is, but
It does just sound like generic small town.
yeah,
USA.
Thunder Bay. Yeah.
Thunder Bay, Wisconsin.
But the Canadianisms.
But we don't wave Canadian flags
Yeah.
either. But
in the same way that I don't think young kids do. I don't think young people growing up in Canada think about being Canadian for a second. They listen to the music that they. It was different in our generation because of like Canadian certification. Like we were forced. Like Big Shiny Tunes, I'm sure got fully funded by the Canadian government to get released, right? Like Canadian music releases they're mandated in this country, so we have to listen to Canadian music, like it or love it. Like it was a part of our childhood, and I think that less and less is going on now because now kids are not sitting in front of much music and seeing
don't listen to
every
the radio
10th song,
yeah.
or listening to the radio and see every 10th song must be Canadian. Now they just pick on YouTube what it is they're going to see, so they're only accessing American culture. Which is kind of sad, actually. I've never thought about
and
that
yet
before.
the Canadian music industry is still doing okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was-
It's not the same as when, Age of Electric was riding high.
But it is a question for Canadian filmmakers to some extent, because like a lot of funding bodies here require like an actual amount of Canadian qualities, whereas to sell a film in the States, you kind of don't want that. Those are seen as incredibly negative. They want to make it seem like it's Minnesota or something like that.
100%. Like, what was that? A Goyen film, The Sweet Hereafter, a Canadian book that takes place in a Canadian city, and then they move it to northern Michigan or something like that. I think they did. The whole story takes place in
Michigan. It was Alaska. No.
I think it was in a northern state. It doesn't matter, but you're 100% right that
I'm not sure that you're right about that. They might have just hidden it.
No, they did. I know it was American.
Really?
Yeah, because I remember they had American license plates. But that tension definitely exists, and there is a reason why every single film that TIFF programs, that's a Canadian release, that is 100% funded by Telefilm, never does any business in the States, and it's because of that exact tension where Americans do not want to see the types of movies that Telefilm wants to fund.
Yeah.
They just don't. There is no marketability to what. It's changing. I mean, Telefilm is definitely, especially in the last year, is definitely trying to look at what American studios are trying to release and trying to fund those films. But I can't think of, there's probably 1 in 20 or 1 in 50 probably Telefilm funded films that make a splash or even have any impact in the American film market. It's because of that exact thing that you're bringing up.
At our world premiere, there was a guy in the audience from the Huffington Post, and he got up during our Q&A, and he said, "You're not Canadian. This can't be a Canadian movie."
It doesn't seem like.
He said, "I've never seen a Canadian movie that looks." He said that looks like this. And we talked to him afterwards. He was a great guy, and had some nice things to say about the film. And we're like, "What does a Canadian movie look like?" And he's like, "Well, it doesn't look like that, and it doesn't sound like that." And yeah, but I don't know. It's something we're trying to figure out, and we're trying to, we're not going anywhere. We want to keep working in Canada.
Definitely.
And, we want to be part of whatever sort of movement is going to figure out these issues that have been plaguing us for, my whole life.
Well, I think it's a systemic issue between Telefilm and the Toronto International Film Festival. Not to slip my own throat here on camera, but it seems like there is huge pressure on the programming staff at TIFF to work with Telefilm in a lot of ways, and to work with the OMDC, and to work with these bodies, because there's a lot of taxpayer money going into these films. Why shouldn't these films be then on display at the biggest film festival in the world, which we just so happen to have? So there seems to be a real line, okay, you do this with Telefilm, and you go and you play at TIFF, and look at that, you made a great movie. The problem seems to be that whether it's at the beginning with Telefilm or somewhere along the line, those, without sounding critical, it seems like those.
I think
films,
you're sounding a little critical.
but I don't mean to be. I'm just trying to say that it seems like systemically there is an issue from production to distribution that happens all within Canada, with distribution being basically playing at TIFF, that the audiences, especially mainstream audiences, are not taken into consideration at a certain point. And it's tough to have an original voice.
But that's why I think what's happening now is it's very exciting, because you could just go out and make a movie. If you have a voice and you have something to say, we saw it with the stuff College Street Films has done with Cravina and Tower.
Actually, that's a great example.
And to a certain extent, our movie and the 1K challenge. They made 5 features for $1,000, this summer. So, they might look like shit and sound like shit, and the performances might not be great. But if there's a talent there and there's a voice there, that's going to come through no matter what.
You're not talking about Tower and Cravina, though. You're talking about those $5,000.
Yeah. Hold on. What?
There's a reading of what you just said that it's the Tower and Cravina, they may look like shit and
No.
like shit.
I was talking about
They were
the
not
1K
made for
challenge
one-
movies.
1K.
Those movies
Yeah,
were
no.
made for $1,000, and I think they both look and sound. We already talked about the movies before we were rolling, and
Where
we said that we liked them.
We were at the P&I screenings of both films. Yeah, it's funny how it seems like Donen seems to be in a lot of ways sort of riding this wave of new Canadian voices. Just this last year at TIFF was a great example. That it definitely goes against what I just said about it seems like Telefilm needs to ferry your film into TIFF or into major Canadian festivals. It seems like it is starting to change. And those two films are extremely, I would say, they're extremely unique when seen against what mainstream Canadian
Sure.
filmmaking is.
Score a hockey musical.
No doubt.
Well,
No
and,
doubt.
and just as an aside, whenever we talk about the Canadian film industry, we must exclude Quebec, obviously.
Yeah.
Because
They're
their
very
movies
different.
are amazing.
Very different.
So when you mention a movement, or is that what you're talking about? Like this movement that's happening?
Yeah, I forget who wrote that article in the Grid. Does anybody remember?
It's probably Adam Naiman.
Yeah, probably name it for
Yeah,
sure.
like he nailed it. He basically attributed a lot of it to what Stacey's doing and what's coming out of there. I mean, we know Igor. We don't know those guys who made Tower, even though I really liked the film. And yeah, for sure. Like, you know, I don't know. I mean, those films have a certain artistry that our film certainly doesn't have. But if we get lumped in with those films,
But that,
I'd be okay with
there's
that.
the same. I think there's the same degree of commitment to form and story. It just in different genres or modes.
I
we'd
think
say.
that's fair. Sure.
Like your film seems, and Nirvana before, it seems like they're more in tune with kind of how people consume media now, like with the jump between video games and music that you would listen to and not clearing things and things like
Right.
like it seems like they're both operating at the same level but focusing on different kinds of stories or different kinds of viewers even, because their films are films that have viewers that are accustomed to slower pace, longer shot lengths, whereas I think that
It's the European model.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
well, they're European filmmakers.
Yeah. Which we love. So.
I think what it comes down to is the fact that the modes of production of high quality films have become incredibly cheap.
Yeah.
I know Igor made his movie for almost no money. I mean, we went to film school together, and that was his thesis project from his master's. So it's just that the world has turned enough that now you can make a feature without needing to pour massive personal resources into it. It still does. You still have to sacrifice quite a bit, but now 100 people could do it, whereas 10 years ago 1 person could do it. And
Which also means that there's more competition. There's a lot
Yeah.
more shit to wait. Like festivals now, they need to screen 10 times more movies than they did 10 years ago.
And
At
hire
least-
more people to watch all of the
Yeah.
exactly.
Even though I suspect most festivals don't watch the submissions anyways.
yeah.
Yeah.
So.
But that movement, I mean, who knows? I mean, Igor's my friend. We've never met the Tower guys. Like, so I suppose there is when we talk to people in the States, we say there is no independent filmmaking happening in Toronto. However ignorant that sounds, like when people ask, so what's it like shooting in Toronto? We say, well, we know that we're making movies. We don't know a single other person shooting films for no money in Toronto. And that's
Which
true.
obviously is a lie. Like we've just talked about 10 people who are.
Okay, yeah, but it's not like we know those people, and it's not like we all talk. It's like it's not like we all share an office where we have like 6 5Ds, and we're all like, okay, when are you shooting? Like, what's happening is that I think in cities all over the world, people are starting to make movies on their own, and whether or not Toronto, I don't think Toronto is there yet. I think there definitely is a movement of young people making films in the city, but they're not communicating with one another yet. Maybe this show is a good stepping stone towards
Basically interviewed all at this
that.
point.
Yeah, because this is one place where we've all kind of come together, albeit at different times.
Do you think there's a benefit to that or not? Like,
For sure.
Definitely,
Yeah.
huge.
You need to feel like you're part of a community.
And more than that, other people need to think that.
it's a marketing
Let's go.
tool
Yeah.
to be able to say like blank new wave. Like that's the key, right? Like the French New Wave, those films were not similar. All of those filmmakers were making different films, but like it's just so marketable to be able to say all of these things are happening.
Absolutely.
So-
we just happen to be the same age, or more or less, as those other guys.
But you started with web, which is interesting, like the web series model, which is now is kind of like you're kind of before that trend, which is now hitting like it's Malcolm Gladwell tipping point of like there being everyone thinking like, oh, I'll just put it on the web, like I'll just make this web series.
Mhm.
Like, what was the experience of dealing in that medium before?
We were still just getting out of film school, and we were not taking it seriously. We were just trying to make a show for our friends. And if you watch, like the first 2 or 3 episodes of Nirvana the band are like awful. Like they're so bad. Like they're clearly done. They're all shot in SD, like for no reason other than to just kind of be funny. And we're not thinking at all of making a web show or releasing something for web or anything like that. But I think it was after our third episode got released that Jay and I would start meeting people who had seen the show, because we weren't doing no advertising. I didn't even have a Facebook account. Like, we were doing zero advertising for the show at all. But people in Toronto, I guess, started watching, especially people in university. And then we thought, oh wow, what a cool thing that people are watching the show. And then we started taking it very seriously. And we weren't following any kind of guide or anything like that. We were just trying to make a show that we thought was funny, not thinking about like this is a web show or this is what a web show could be or anything like that. Really, what it was is like just making student films that your professors would never give you good marks for, more or less. Like, it was like just me and my friends screwing around using all licensed stuff, like where nothing meant anything and it was all just completely ridiculous. That's more where it came out of. And then the only place where you can show that to people is on the web, because we had it's not like we were like, oh, we'll sell this at all. We never thought that.
But it's funny because you finished school like 3 or 4 years, 3 years after me, right?
Yeah.
And when I finished school, it was like you had to go and make a feature. Like that was what you had to do. And you're right now that there's different things that you can do that weren't available even 10 years ago when I finished school. So we went out and made a feature. But I think the key similarity is that, again, just you have to do something. You can't have a script that you're like, oh, I'm so amazing, why won't anybody make this script?
Yeah,
like we live in an age
work.
where you have to do something. And if you have skill and talent and voice and all these things, I mean, look at Lena Dunham, right? Like, she made like 3 feature films before she made Girls, and people saw, oh, this girl has a voice, and we're gonna, and Judd Apatow found her, and he's like, we're gonna put you on HBO.
Josh Trank is the same way. The guy who made Chronicle, he made Chronicle off of like a little web video of like a bunch of Star Wars people at a birthday party fighting with lightsabers. When you watch, it's like, yeah, that's great, and it's quite creative. But literally, agencies saw the film and were like, let's try to get this guy a feature. And more, the people who are getting features in Hollywood, I mean, this definitely is. Maybe nobody cares about this, but to get a feature in Hollywood, it's all like VFX guys who are becoming directors, guys who directed commercials, like really cool commercials. The guy who directed Project X had directed a really crazy Adidas commercial at like a party, and he got that movie off of that. Like, you just need to do something. You have to do anything, and it doesn't matter what medium that is in. In fact, the web is probably the best place to do it, because if you do one amazing thing, it doesn't even matter. Like, I mean, it can be a shitty Star Wars video that is literally shot on handycams. Like, that is enough to get studios to think, oh, this guy could do this feature, because for some reason that's how they think, which is crazy.
Well, that's kind of how Fincher's, like, that was like, it's the music video model is being adapted now to
But
just...
even he was like a consummate. He did like 20 huge budget music videos. Like, I'm talking like guys getting features now are doing like just like the worst YouTube videos. I don't mean like they're bad quality. There's definitely a voice there, but like it's not like $1 million. They didn't spend much money.
Yeah. But it is interesting that Nirvana, it's almost like it's, because it was on the web, it could be a little more gonzo. It could be a little more cross media. Like, there could be more video game influence than the Dirties. Like, you can see how the Dirties focuses it to just like film references, whereas Nirvana like is like a smorgasbord of just like.
Yeah, we were definitely conscious making the Dirties that at some point we wanted to release this movie and sell this movie and distribute this movie, and we would take certain liberties. But everything in the movie is cleared, and
there's no Steely Dan, constant Steely Dan.
it's very funny that you said that.
The original
script
title of the film was Deacon Blues. The whole movie was about, I know I said it was already about the hazards of sitting beneath palm trees.
But it was really about Steely Dan.
It was really about these 2 kids who were obsessed with Steely Dan. That's not a joke.
Which is the end of Nirvana is about a shooting with Steely Dan playing, so it's kind of like.
We stole all that from that documentary Comedian, if you've ever seen it. Yeah, we stole all that stuff. But I would say you're right, and at the same time, we did take that model of Nirvana the band, like use everything, don't care about copyright, like any influence, we play Mario Kart 64 in the Dirties, like we do all these things.
But it's not being keyed into like the background, right?
No, we don't formally
on the bottom corner of the frame.
Yeah, we don't formally fuck with it in the way that we could with Nirvana the band, because the reality didn't matter.
Yep.
But we wanted to take that exact same world of like not clearing anything and making it seem like kids are literally running the asylum,
Yeah.
and put that into a feature, because that's a really cool space. It's cool to watch a movie. I mean, the biggest fans of the Dirties are film students.
Yeah.
Like whenever we screen it anywhere, it's always the film students who are like they can't believe that this got made, because it's every, like, beat by beat, everything that you're told you're not allowed to do. All uncleared stuff, all shot in public, all shot without clearances, all shot with people who don't know they're on camera. But what we did was we thought, why are those things so cool? They're cool because they seem like they're real and dynamic. So why don't we do all of those things the right way? And that's definitely, I'm not trying to say we invented that, because I'm sure that's been done before. I mean, Borat basically did that. But
even on Borat, everything was cleared before. Most of the stuff. They'd
Not
go
the
to the
people.
rodeo.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
everybody
yeah.
that, you know.
The big
stuff
difference
on
is
the
that we're
street.
making a drama and not a comedy. I'd say that is the big difference.
Well,
is
no, the big difference is that we weren't trying to embarrass and lampoon those subjects. We were trying to use them for our own dramatic purposes.
Well, there are a lot of differences. Yes. Yeah.
That's how I sleep at night.
Well, nobody got
We've established
embarrassed.
that it's not Borat.
I love
Oh,
Borat.
but Borat was a big touchstone
Yeah.
for this film. Borat and well, I mean for Nirvana the band anyway. I love that stuff, and yet nobody's doing it. It's so crazy. So crazy. It's crazy that Sacha Baron Cohen, to be honest, didn't make a drama the same way.
Well, I guess you could say The Dictator would be an interesting comparison, because it's like dealing with a little bit more serious subject matter while
Guess
still.
what? There's
But
nothing
so
real
silly.
in that film.
Yeah.
And the problem, I mean, for him is that he became a star.
Yeah.
Right? Like I always, if the Dirties, blows up, it makes it harder to make the next movie in the same way, because as soon as somebody recognizes you,
Okay, but that will never happen. And beyond that, I don't think that's true, because people, even if people are like, oh wow, there's that guy from the Dirties, ridiculous as that is, they'll
Well,
still
think that you're talking about a band, first of all. Have you experienced that?
right, yeah. They'll still, people will still behave authentically because they won't see the cameras.
sure.
You always hide the cameras from the people you're shooting with. That's the big secret. Put them far away. Shoot on like 250s or 300 lenses. This new movie we're making it all takes place in the 60s, but we're using these ingenue lenses that are like 25 300s, I think, and so much of it is going to be like taking place right at the very end of the lens, like being shot from like third floor apartment windows down. Like that's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing.
It sounds a bit like, what is that film, Death of a President? Like the kind of like...
Okay, so if that it is.
It's kind of like that.
It's kind of
movie.
actually it's a lot like Death of a President,
Because
except
they
with
use quite a bit
no-
of stock footage in that movie also.
but with no talking head interviews.
Oh, okay.
Like it is the Dirties.
Yeah.
Like where the characters control the filmmaking. Like they go undercover into NASA as like a Maisels Brothers style doc crew, and so they're making this doc inside NASA ostensibly to show the Apollo mission, but their mission from the CIA was to find spies. And while they're there looking for spies in the CIA, by tapping phones and doing the whole Watergate thing, they find out that they can't, at the top level,
NASA can't.
NASA can't make it to the moon in 1969. And so rather than call the CIA and say, guess what, guys, they're going to break Kennedy's promise, the Russians are going to win the space race, they say, you know what we can do to prove ourselves to the CIA and everybody? We will fake the moon mission ourselves, just these four guys.
No Kubrick?
Well, they
Kubrick's involved.
Kubrick's in it. Not physically Kubrick, but they go and they steal all the sets from 2001.
Yeah.
But
Did you see that movie, Room 237?
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean basically the same ideas, but
So
go ahead.
going back to the Dirties for a moment, like I wanted to talk a bit about like how being perceived as American filmmakers, which seems at once like it's going to be an accepting thing, but also it seems like it's a touchy subject for Americans. So like what has been your experience with like, audiences and the topic of school shootings?
We thought it was going to be a lot worse than it wound up being.
What surprised me is that at all the and we haven't done that many screenings yet, but I'm waiting for that person who stands up
And says,
"How dare you?
Yeah.
Who are you?" And we've had nothing but
Praise.
and support from our audiences, from the majority of the critics who've seen the film.
I'd say critically, without seeing the film, it's very easy to think that this was an insensitive, like bombastic thing to do. And we were worried about that. When we were trying to get money to make this film, we were facing the exact same problems, because you watch Nirvana the band and you meet us and you think, well, here are a bunch of kind of like, these are kids that don't care about anything. Why would, and all they want to do is make people laugh. Why would we ever want to make a film with them about something so serious? And I think on paper that's the way it seems, like a comedy about kids doing a school shooting is a tasteless, awful subject. But I think anybody who sits in a theater and watches the film from beginning to end has no choice but to, I mean, we're trying to treat this subject matter as sensitively and as realistically as we possibly can. So I think it's quite difficult to watch the entire film and then think that that our motives were trading on this political issue for viewership. I mean, clearly that's not what's going on. And we think, sort of against the odds, we were able to give a perspective on violence, bullying, and the psychology of young people that really is not talked about in most mainstream filmmaking. And I think that, as a breath of fresh air for most people, is enough to get past the soonness of this.
We were when that stuff went down in Newtown, we were programmed at Slamdance already, but they hadn't announced. And I called Matt at, obviously terrible tragedy, but I was looking at it from our perspective, and the perspective of our film, and I said,
they're going to pull us.
They're pulling us for sure.
Yeah.
Because if it was my festival, that's what I would think I would do. Like, I don't want all this controversy surrounding this one film to overshadow all the other films and filmmakers. And they called us that day, and I'm like, oh, here's the call. And they were just telling us, we're behind you 100%. We believe in this film. It's important that you're careful with how you present the film and how you talk about the film. But it seemed like it made the film more important, and it made people want to see the film more, and people want to talk about the film more. When we did our cast and crew screening on the Tuesday, I think the shooting was on a Friday, and we did it the following Tuesday at the Royal. We had like 300 of our family, friends, the people who made the film, and it was just like people would not leave the theater. They just wanted to talk, and in the lobby, and we went to the bar across the street, and like for hours afterwards, because it was so raw, and people just wanted to talk about it. And I don't, we don't think the film has any answers, or this is what we need to do, this is how we solve this problem. But at the very least, we think that the film, we want it to be part of a conversation, to start a conversation, that we need to talk about these things in a way that Gus Van Sant's Elephant doesn't really address, or and I'm a big fan of that film. I think it's a very beautiful movie, but I don't think it deals with this subject in the same way that our film deals with the subject.
Well, it seems like a riff on a very Columbine specifically. Like, it has a lot to do with those.
That was our big touchstone. Josh and I, when we were kind of putting the film together, would watch every shred of footage we could about the Columbine guys, especially the stuff that they'd shot themselves, which obviously is a huge influence on these films, on the Dirties. Like, people who like making movies about themselves and are trying to make themselves celebrities was very interesting to us. And I mean, clearly that's the through line of our film. This guy, because Owen's just kind of involved in it on the fringes, this guy who is trying to make this cult of celebrity, or this movie star persona around himself, very much in the way that Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were trying to do with them. So we're very conscious of that was psychologically where those guys were, and that was very much at play in everything that they did. They were trying to make each other laugh, and trying to play in the world of cool people, important people in their own films. If you get a chance to see those films, I would definitely do it, because after watching, we tried to do frame for frame accurate recreations of the stuff that they were doing in our film, which are cool to
really at that scene at the quarry in Thunder Bay. There's a lot of that stuff. But yeah, that was like the impetus for the whole movie, because these films are in a BBC doc that are on YouTube, and this doc just like vilifies these kids, and they're monsters and these horrible people. And I think Josh's idea, when he had the initial idea, was just like, what if we like these people? What if they seem like,
it wasn't
funny
what
guys?
if, it was like, you do like these people when you just see this footage. Yeah, you do. You think, well, that's just like me when I was in high school.
Well, it seems like the question for Elephant was probably a question that you had to face too, which is like, how much violence do you show? Like, Elephant's almost like half and half, right? Like, there's a good portion of the film that is kind of creating an empathetic connection with these characters before it happens. But then with yours, it's like, was there ever a question of maybe we want less violence, like end it just before the shooting, or even more like the expectation that there's a bit more of a spectacle, like you see it play out more than it does, because it's pretty brief, all
Right.
told in the film.
Well, we're trying to do it as realistically as we could. There's two sides to this question. The first one is we didn't have the money to shoot the ending as it exists in the film originally. So originally the film ends right before there is a school shooting, or another version that we had, it ends with Matt deciding not to go
Okay.
ahead with it, just because we couldn't afford it, because it was such an expensive effect to do. But then when we found a way to do it quite cheaply, we knew we wanted to do it exactly like that, exactly the way that we did. Like before, you can imagine things really get out of control, because Matt's plan is not,
It's not mass shooting.
Yeah.
yeah, and it's not go in with AK-47s and just start killing people. I mean, like throughout the entire film, you sort of see that this is about, political statement, and it's about killing just these certain people, and that kind of keeps getting hammered into the viewer. And so we always knew that if we were going to do it, it was going to be very, very controlled and very contained, the way that we did it. But the big problem with our programming concerns that exact thing. The people at Sundance, when we went down to Park City, we hadn't heard anything from them other than that they didn't think our film was right for them. But all the programmers knew us. All the Sundance programmers knew us, and it was quite flattering.
That was just walking down the street, they'd stop us,
And they would
the
talk.
Dirties.
And they wanted to talk about the film, and we were like, oh, wow, we didn't realize you guys liked the film so much. And they all had the exact same thing to say, was that, man, if we just couldn't find a place for it, the ending was not violent enough for us to put in Midnight Madness, and it wasn't raw enough for us to put in this new, like, I don't know what it's called, Nexus or whatever.
It's like their first-time features program,
Yeah,
basically.
and so they just couldn't find a place for us, and it was kind of food for thought, because we were like, oh wow, I suppose there is a world where we do this incredibly violent, super revenge-oriented ending that does get 2 billion nerds going, yeah, wow. But I mean, that was like the most unrealistic thing in the world to
Well,
us.
it was important for us also not to sensationalize the act. And
Of course not.
Well, like,
we didn't punch up the red and the blood, like it was, we left it almost as is from how we shot it. They were all in camera, on set effects.
and you have two people basically getting shot, and it's like, what I find interesting is that the film's called The Dirties, but like, especially with the last line, the whole thing is about Matt, more or less, and it's like about him, and to the point where he gets distracted from even like the act of the school, the like getting revenge. Like, how did you settle on that name and kind of focusing on these bullies for a film that is largely not about them?
Well, two things. The first one is that the film is really a transformation from certain people being evil to other people being evil. And that, however subtle, is basically about Matt becoming the Dirties. And you can see that at the midpoint of the film, actually more like the transition into Act 2, you can see the bullies who threw a rock at Owen, they call Matt and Owen the Dirties because they made this film. They're like, fuck you, Dirties. Like, they don't understand the joke. Like, and people, you would assume after they make this film, there's a lot more of it, but we took it out. Like, Matt and Owen get called the Dirties after they make this film. Because, and it's funny, when we went to Park City, everybody called us the Dirties.
Yeah.
Like, that's just sort of how the film works, I guess. Like, you make something, everybody calls you that. And so the Dirties, to Matt, you notice that they play the Dirties in their version of their film. Like, they want to be this thing. And it's very much about them wanting to control the power systems that are so crushing to them. Like, they want to hold the keys. They want to be the guys who get to tell people who's good and who's not good. They want to be able to push people around in the hall. Like, I mean, not they, but Matt. Like, he wants to experience this power. And that's why he casts himself in the role of these people in his film. And that's why, as the film goes on, he really becomes the guy who's inciting violence when he goes and beats up. He doesn't beat up, but he basically picks a fight with the guy who beat him up in the first scene of the film. Like, he's making a transition away from himself, which is sort of a very kind of dominated, weak person, into what he thinks is a strong, powerful person. And so he wants to be the Dirties. And then...
that scene, the cake scene, when he really attacks Owen.
Because he's become a Dirty.
He recognizes that, and it's that, it's kind of that classic, like the 80s movie, like the John Hughes movie, you know, even though Can't Buy Me Love's not a John Hughes movie, but like Can't Buy Me Love, right? That's how that movie works. He's like this nerd, and he becomes cool, and you know, it's like that classic kind of archetypal story, which I think this movie has a lot in common with. It's you want to be what you're not, and
the film is called The Dirties because it's about who, like, that label and what that label means and how it changes throughout the film. I mean, so if you look at it, like, those characters, like the bullies in the school, are nobodies. Like, we never know their names really. Like, they don't say anything. Like, just like, it would be so easy for Matt and Owen to be like, you know what? Who cares about those guys? Why don't we just ignore them and just keep doing?
well, and
our
Owen
thing?
ostensibly does do that.
Yeah, he does. But it's about that obsession that Matt has. Yeah.
Do you get associated with like John Hughes films about high school that aren't necessarily school shooting films when you're like applying to festivals? Like how do programmers perceive you? Like what hole are they putting you in?
That was written. One of our festival write-ups said that there
Yeah,
was
they
a
put us
John
in the
Hughes-
canon kind
of John Hughes kind of
you know,
stuff. But
election, and you know, I mean, no, I don't think we thought about that too. You know, I think it's actually funny if you play the first 10 minutes of the Dirties and you play the first 10 minutes of Superbad. There's a lot of the relationship,
Yeah.
like the Owen Matt dynamic, is exactly the same as Jonah Hill and Michael Cera in that movie. And of course, like, you know, I grew up in the 80s, and like those movies meant something to me. And I don't think teen movies today have as much heart as those movies had back then. And I think the Dirties has a lot of heart. I think that's what makes it sort of the turn at the end really sad, is that you really like these people. But you know, I don't think of it as a high school movie. Maybe it is, but I don't know.
But as a programming decision, I wonder. We always get programmed as a comedy. No, as a drama.
As a drama.
Yeah, we always get programmed as a drama, and they say very little about the film. And normally when they introduce the film, they just say, "Here's the Dirties," and they say nothing about it.
We did, though. One of the things that we did kind of right at the end of editing was we were thinking about how this movie's going to get programmed, and submitting this movie to a festival with no track record. People don't know who we are.
They would turn it off
It's
after
just
5
like
minutes.
it looks like it's a joke, and so we did two things, I think, because it's sort of almost straight for the programmers. And one was we put that warning right at the head, which sort of lends a seriousness to all the material that will follow, even though I think you forget about it 2 minutes into the movie. And then we put in that very kind of vox populi stuff about bullying, like in the first 5 minutes. And they were pretty calculated moves, sort of saying, if we put these two things in the movie, it makes it harder to turn off this movie and to dismiss this movie and ignore this movie as just being, oh my God, these kids made this movie, this is terrible. And I don't know, you know, I guess it served us well because we've been programmed at a few festivals that we're having to screen at. But
still, I'm sure there are programmers who turn
Turned
this
it
film off after 5 minutes. Because because it looks like a crappy movie made by high school students. So, and it's just what it does. So,
And there seems to be like a resistance to found footage films too. I find like
sure, huge. And that's the big thing that we've been coming up against too. Like even when we meet people who want us to work on other films, it's always, that's where the conversation starts. Like, oh, you made that found footage movie. Can you do a found footage movie like this or like this? Or people are like, oh, found footage has been done to death. But your film is, so, that's why I say we don't, this is not a found footage movie. There is a real distinct difference between a movie like Paranormal Activity or or a movie like The Bay, if you've seen that,
or
like
Cloverfield.
or Cloverfield,
yeah.
like, well, no, Cloverfield is a little different, but Chronicle definitely. So Chronicle is a found footage movie.
I think a very good one.
Oh, well, yeah, a great one. But that movie is not. But The Dirties is in no way connected to that mode of filming, and that's not a place where we want to make. It's too. Here's what I want to say, without sounding critical of those films. It is too easy to just say every camera is ours. Any camera we want, we can use. Like that. That to me is too easy because you have too many decisions, and you can shoot anything and justify it any way you want. Like even some of those old like Best in Show, even those kind of docs sometimes do that trick, and I don't think that's fair. I think
Those also, like, they rely heavily on talking head.
Yeah.
Which our stuff never does.
I think that in the world of fake documentary, the rules are much more strict and much more severe, and you actually get paid back quite a bit, but from audiences, if you follow those rules quite closely, because the reality that you create is more tangible, and it's like you feel like anything you're shown has a realism to it that you just don't in a found footage film. I mean, I resist that label heavily with our films. It's just because it's easy. I think that in 10 years, the distinction will be much clearer. It's just because both of those forms are so new. Definitely, that's what it is.
Have you found a greater reception internationally than in Canada? Like, it seems like all the festivals that you're talking about are international ones as opposed to...
Well, they're all American. Definitely nobody in Canada knows about this film.
Yeah.
That's something we've experienced for sure. Like, nobody in Canada is interested in the film. Like, we had like 9 or 10 American distributors interested in the film. Not one person from Canada ever called us ever. Like every
I think in Canada, if they're not talking about you in playback, it's like you don't exist. And so because
Playback
we're
cover
having,
a lot though. They cover basically anything if you can walk
I know,
and
but
talk.
they did, but they didn't cover Slamdance, right? So we premiered at Slamdance, we won the prize at Slamdance, and it's like that news never really made it up here.
ever. Like every single American.
And that's not a knock. That's just, I think that's how.
Yeah, there just seems to be a bit of a disconnection,
works.
and it stems from like if you didn't play TIFF or Calgary, or like if you don't have a Canadian agent, like no Canadian agencies have reached out to talk to us, whereas every single American agency is like, we will do anything you want, we will do anything to sign with us, and so that has been very weird. It's like we've just been treated as though we're Americans through and through. I'm not sure if that's a failing of the Canadian system, but definitely we notice it.
But we haven't screened in Canada, so to say that it's being ignored, I don't know if that's true.
Well,
It'll depend.
Yeah, it's only been a month and a half since the
the
world
movie.
premiere of the
Yeah.
movie, so.
But I've noticed the same thing, which is that, usually you expect Canada, like our kind of stereotype is that when you get recognition elsewhere, the Canadian recognition soon
trickle down,
follows, right?
yeah.
So it's like, you would almost expect following Slamdance that there would be a quicker...
We got invited to a brunch hosted by Telefilm that Sarah Pauly was at.
This
when
was
we were
in Park City.
When we were in Park City.
It was actually a great brunch that Telefilm.
What was the spread? It was a good spread.
It was actually more of a lunch.
Yeah, we ordered, and it was really good. And then we got interviewed by E-Talk.
Well, what was? But I don't think that ever ran.
Of course it
But
never ran.
CHCH, they ran a 20-second clip of an interview they did with you in their Sundance thing. But the Telefilm thing, to go back to that, it was actually pretty cool because what they did is they organized this lunch and they just invited all of these international programmers. So they fed them lunch and then basically gave us the opportunity to talk to them. So that was a good event that they did.
So they were facilitating international opportunities, like just...
Yep, for our movie, which didn't have Telefilm funding or anything. So
Yeah, which was actually very cool. Telefilm is cool once you, like, especially if you do something interesting, that it's not like just because you didn't get Telefilm money, they alienate you. Like, they're quite friendly, especially on the French side. French side's very friendly of Telefilm. Ooh. I'm just thinking about how the Canadian press, like, it's funny, Canada, especially like a movie like this that breaks rules and is not like, there's nothing nice about this movie. I don't think Canada will ever screen at a Canadian festival worth a damn ever. But
well, I think you're wrong.
No.
Time will tell.
But for what reason? Like,
that, I don't know what it is, but we screened this. So we showed an early cut. God, you guys can't hear this, but we screened an early cut to the TIFF programmers, and like, they didn't even talk with us about the film. Like, they just sent us a form rejection letter, and
This was before we put our response to like put in that card at the head and to put in that stuff about bullying was kind of in direct response to this letter. We're like, yeah, I don't think they got the movie.
yeah, like they just didn't care, and like nobody, like, we screened it for a bunch of like Canadian distributors as well, like early on before we'd done anything, like with Slamdance or anything like that, and like nobody, people were like, oh yeah, it's good, like, but nobody, it's almost like they are like in Canada, if your movie doesn't look like a big American movie or isn't trying to look like a big American movie, there's just no, they've got no access point, because there's a
How edited is your show?
oh, it's not. Like,
this is gonna go live. I mean, we don't mind.
we're I think broadcasting live, right?
Straight to the TIFF offices, right to the 3rd floor. This is going straight to the TIFF archive. Steve Gravestock is watching this happen live with his big chalkboard beside him. Well, I guess that's that. I thought they were interested in 2013, but we'll give it to fucking whatever, Veninger now.
We're gonna give it to a McGowan.
Yeah, Rachel McAdams. We're gonna give it to Rachel McAdams' doc about getting her period.
Uh-oh.
That's a dig against Sarah Polley, in case you didn't.
There's a lot of digs. It's a multi-level dig.
Sarah Polley, that movie. No, I only saw 5 minutes of it on an airplane, but I can't believe that movie has gotten as much play as it has. Stories We Tell. It's like that's the greatest.
What's a story about Canadian filmmaking and Canadian media and being in that? It's like, as much as it's about her, which is great and interesting, it's like it's also a reflection of like this media festival lifestyle. They all know, everyone knows one another.
I know, that's what it is. Makes me sick. Makes me sick. They programmed
it was pretty funny. We were flying to Utah to go to the festival.
And it was playing on Air Canada.
and it was like, and her movie's playing at Sundance, and it's on Air Canada. I'm like, I don't need to go see this at Sundance. I can watch it right here.
Well, it's interesting because it's available on Air Canada, but you can't see it if you were not flying anywhere. You could not see that film. And I think that's true. It's an interesting point that you mentioned about distribution in Canada, is that like the Canadian Screen Awards just happened, and between Best Director and Best Picture, you had 8 different films that were in either or both, and 4 of them you could see at that point. Like, so the people who are the Canadian citizens even watching this have no access to Canadian films in any way, shape, or form.
Now you sound like Lantos, and this is kind of his pitch for the new network that he's done.
Who has access to that? Like, it's like,
well, that's his whole thing. He wants it to be on basic cable, which I'm all for. He's basically like, this is going to be on basic cable, so you're feeding these Canadian films directly into people's. Anybody who has a television, basically, is going to have these movies.
Well, it's an all or nothing distinction, right? Like, if it's on iTunes or whatever, you can choose. You're like, I'm going to rent this. I'm going to take a look at it. If it's on basic cable, you're paying for everything. Like, you're pre-committed to whatever happens. And it just seems strange that there's like this lag between being able to see it. But if you're on Air Canada, it's cool. Like, Spotify or whatever is like tossing it in there. Like this documentary with like what's 8mm footage or something like that you can watch on a small screen in front of in the seat in front of you.
Stacey Donen should start an airline.
Yeah, that's
mobile theaters where you can screen all these things like as you fly.
Have you guys considered though that like second opportunity distribution window, like how to like solve that problem for Canadian films, like when to get it out there, like how soon is too soon?
We don't even think about it. I think if we're being honest, we sold to a distributor and we said let them do whatever it is that they want. Like, I mean, because
we sold to a distributor that interested us because
they want to get it
model.
out. Yes,
you know,
but it's not
I
like
think this idea of like kind of a joint theatrical VOD release, to address your point specifically, I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
Because the idea is, so say you open in Toronto, say you open at Lightbox and you have a week run there, then that means suddenly you get all of this national press because you get the Globe and Mail, the National Post, and all of these traditional news outlets that are going to come and review the movie. And then say you live in like, I don't know, somewhere in Newfoundland, and you can't see that movie because you don't live in Toronto. But the same day that it's in the theaters that you're reading this review, you could go home that night on a Friday night, open a bottle of wine, VOD, and there's your night. And so I think that's an interesting model because you're capitalizing on the traditional sort of press and media that's associated with a big opening, but you're also allowing people all over the country to say, oh, that movie interests me, here's my $7.99 or whatever, you watch in the comfort of your own home. And I think that's an interesting model, and I think it's something that's going to take off for a few years until the next thing comes along. I think Soderbergh was the first guy to ever do that. He did
Day and Day with Bubble,
yeah. And I think it's interesting. You know, I haven't seen it work. Obviously, the traditional mode of releasing a movie theatrically, I mean, that doesn't exist. It's dead. It costs too much money. I mean, you know, a movie opens in Canada, it opens on 2 screens, 3 screens. I mean, that's not how you're going to get people to see your movie.
Well, what about like physical media? Like Nirvana had a really interesting physical component with the extras, and like I know that like independent filmmakers in the States, they have something like Factory 25 that are looking for interesting ways to package.
Or Redbox.
Yeah, like just at least create like a physical thing that.
Well, we love. I mean, we grew up in the era, like the golden age of DVD, which was, as film students, there was nothing more exciting than a movie you loved coming out with all these great features and commentaries and all those things. So we're still kind of married to that, and it's something, I think we've talked when we were shooting the movie. Before we were shooting the movie, we were talking about the DVD of the Dirties as like the end point, because it's a way for the fans to interact with the material in a really exciting way, and for us as the creators to give them stuff that maybe didn't make it into the movie that we loved or whatever. So that's something that still, I think, remains important for us, for sure. But I'll tell you, like my first feature that I did, the most exciting day for me, it came out on DVD on April 24th in the States, and that day, like, it was just all over the Pirate Bay. You know, like, just seeing like 20,000 seaters and leechers on like the day that the DVD came out. And I was literally in my office, and it was like the G5 that I had edited the computer on, and like, and I brought it back to me from the world. And as somebody who like struggled for years to make the movie, like that was very exciting for me, because I knew it had entered the world and it was out there, and now everybody could write their reviews. Oh my God, this movie's gay. This movie sucks. But it was just exciting for me, because you make the movie and that's all you want. You just want people to see it. You just want people to see it. So I think your question is a good question. We don't know what the solution is, but I think, you know, I hope the solution isn't just the Pirate Bay, because then there's no way to like monetize that and to pay back your investors and all that stuff. But
I think the answer is to make movies very cheap, so that, you know, the money that you can make from VOD and limited theatrical will pay back the, you know, the $60,000 or $70,000 you made your movie.
I think you're going to see like that like $4 million movie go like, it's not going to exist anymore. There's going to be the $100,000 movie and like the $50 million movie, and that's it. Because everything else, you know, there's going to be those big studio tentpole movies and then like really low budget stuff. Because everything in between, it's going to be really hard to turn profit on that. I remember we went to this thing that TIFF did, this amazing event in January around the top 10, and they did like this case study of Goon. They were celebrating it as this big success story, which it was, and you know, the producer John Carmody was up there, and he was saying that like the movie hasn't made its money back yet.
Well, he also produces Resident Evil, so he's got like a different
He does.
perspective.
I don't feel bad for him. I'm just saying, you know, it's an $8 million movie or whatever they said it was, and like it has yet to make back its money. And it will, you know, it was on course to do that, but it's just like, yeah, we need to figure out how to support the filmmakers so they can make a living and monetize that. So, yeah, I don't have any answers.
That's a good point to conclude things at.
It's kind of depressing. The
Nice
Dirties
hard
now
edit.
available.
I don't have
on
any
Pirate
answers.
Bay.
Cut.
I mean, what answers could there be? The answer is just keep making good movies. I think people will always pay like the sale that we. Well, we can't even talk about this. What am I saying? I'll tell you about it after. I'll tell you about it afterwards. But there are smart ways to distribute your film so that you can make at least the money that you've spent on them back. And then as soon as you've done that once, you can just make films off of pre-selling foreign territories, because you made a movie before, and that's a great way for independent filmmakers to keep making films.
Did you hear the story of Magic Mike, how they made Magic Mike?
No.
Soderbergh like met Channing Tatum one night in a bar or something, and they were talking, and Tatum's like, "Oh, I've been pitching this movie. This is the movie," and you know, it was what Magic Mike was. And Soderbergh was like, "Don't tell anybody else this idea." And like the next day, he called, and he's like, he just called a bunch of like foreign sales agents, and he's like, "Channing Tatum's attached. We got this movie. I need $8 million." And he got $8 million all off foreign sales, no Hollywood money, nothing from the studios, and he got to make the movie he wanted to make the way he wanted to make it.
Well, that's how Hong Kong functions. It's like you get the stars first, then you come up with the poster and title, almost like Roger Corman. It's like, that's it. Like, you've got the money, then you have like 1 week to shoot the entire thing with like no coverage, just like single camera basically, and then you're done. It's like, and that worked for decades, because that's all you need, and especially if you're selling foreign, right?
Like Snyder's Save the Cat, like that screenwriting Bible, he says the exact same thing. He says, write a log line and design a poster. And he's like, that's your movie. That's all you need.
So crazy. So crazy. It's the exact opposite of what we were doing. Let's just shoot 300
Come
hours.
on, we had the poster and the log line.
Find out what the movie
You're
is
lying.
after 6 months of editing.
We designed the poster, we had a log line, and we're like, that's the Dirties.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're working from the opposite end of that. Yeah, we still don't even know what our poster is going to look like. But who cares? I mean, you know what my advice to young filmmakers is? Make movies for no money and just keep doing it for absolutely no money with your friends as though it's your job. And eventually you'll make something good. Doesn't matter how stupid you are. You eventually will get lucky. You eventually will.
I disagree. That's not my advice. It's try a couple times, and if nothing hits, you're probably doing.
You're done. Yeah, well, you're more critical of these people.
This is like
than
the like Major League Baseball, and this is like the every dog has its day.
Yeah,
like,
even a broken clock is right twice. It doesn't matter. You're
giving people too much credit. You haven't watched as many bad films as I have.
You don't know. I'm telling you, watch an hour of unedited Nirvana the band footage, and I
Right.
challenge
which is on the
you.
DVD.
But you
more or less.
had
an hour of unedited
the
footage.
skill and the talent to turn that. You were Rumpelstiltskin. You
We
leaped
spun it to
and
goal.
Yeah.
No, the woman did it. Rumpelstiltskin just gave her the power. That's right. You're Rumpelstiltskin. We'll send you everything. Congratulations, guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
Peace.